So, how does a man born in, just utter poverty in a log cabin in Ohio, who worked as a canal hand, then becomes a preacher, college president, and a Civil War general, how does that guy navigate the single most corrupt, patronage-driven era in American history to become president?
It's an almost unbelievable story, isn't it? And then his biggest fight isn't with another country, but with his own political party.
Exactly. It's just a fascinating trajectory.
And that's really the heart of C.W. Goodyear's 2023 biography, President Garfield, From Radical to Unifier. It's less about his presidency, which was tragically short, and much more about the brutal political world that made him.
And for everyone listening, we want you to discover a new, in-depth approach to book coverage with this extended summary. Unlike our previous review, which was more of a focused analysis, this is a comprehensive overview. We're tracing the intellectual roots, the key arguments, and the real-world impact of Garfield's life.
Right. And if you appreciate this expanded format, please let us know. Your feedback really does help us shape what we do next.
This book has gotten a ton of praise. Outlets like the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal are calling it the most comprehensive Garfield biography in decades.
It really is. Goodyear just masterfully blends the military history, the intellectual side of Garfield, and the just cutthroat politics of the Gilded Age.
So we're going to trace that path from rural Ohio all the way to the White House. But the key thing to know, and the book makes this clear, is that because his presidency was so brief, most of the story is about his life before that.
Exactly. It's about his evolution from a hardline radical Republican into this figure who is known for trying to find common ground. And just a note, we're going to avoid any spoilers about the final outcomes of his life.
Right. And as you listen, remember, you are experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation powered by Google's Notebook LM, designed for deeper, more dynamic book summaries.
Okay, so where do we start? His beginnings.
Let's do it. That story of social mobility is just. It's the core of who he was. Goodyear makes a huge point that Garfield, born in 1831, was the last president to come from that kind of real frontier poverty.
And his father died when he was just a baby. So he was raised by his widowed mother, Eliza, who was apparently this incredibly determined woman.
That experience really seems to have set the theme for his whole life.
Right.
Self-reliance, but also this deep belief in the power of education.
He was doing hard physical labor, working on canal boats, but his mother just pushed and pushed for him to study.
And the place he grew up, the Western Reserve of Ohio, was also really important.
Oh, hugely. It was culturally distinct. It was basically a transplanted piece of New England, very Puritan, and a hotbed of anti-slavery sentiment.
So that context helps explain why he so quickly embraced the Republican Party's cause.
Right. And his intellectual path was his rocket fuel. He goes from local schools to what's now Hiram College. And he doesn't just study. He starts teaching, he learns classical languages, he loves mathematics, and then he becomes the college president.
It's an incredible ascent. And the book highlights something I hadn't really considered, his time as a lay preacher for the Disciples of Christ.
Yes. That experience was so critical. It's where he mastered public speaking and moral rhetoric. Those are the tools he used for the rest of his life in politics.
Which took him to the Ohio State Legislature just before the war, where he lines up with the new Republican Party. And then everything changes.
The Civil War. He goes from college president to Union officer almost overnight, and he rises fast, all the way to major general.
And Goodyear makes it clear he wasn't some desk general. He was at the Battle of Chickamauga, a really pivotal, bloody fight. That experience, it changed him.
It absolutely radicalized him. The war is what solidified his identity as a radical Republican. These were the guys who wanted to use strong federal power to crush the rebellion, enforce emancipation, and protect formerly enslaved people.
He really earned that radical label on the battlefield.
He did. And then comes this huge political turning point. While he is still in uniform, the leaders back in Ohio nominate him for Congress.
And he wins. He literally steps off the military battlefield and onto the political one in Washington.
Which brings us to phase 2 of his life. Nearly 20 years in the House of Representatives. An entire career right there.
And at first, he's exactly what you'd expect. A strong radical, pushing for aggressive civil rights enforcement, clashing with President Andrew Johnson, all of it.
But you can't survive 2 decades in Congress on ideology alone. Goodyear really stresses that Garfield became a serious policy thinker, a real workhorse.
Right. He gets involved in the nitty-gritty debates over tariffs, the currency, all the complex stuff. He becomes a details guy.
And this is what I found so compelling in the book. His evolution wasn't just him becoming more moderate. Goodyear argues it was more of an effort to manage the tension between his core principles and the messy reality of politics.
You have to explain the context of the Gilded Age here, the
Right.
patronage system.
The spoils system, right. You win an election, you give government jobs to your loyal supporters. This created these incredibly powerful factions within the party. Garfield became this master of personal diplomacy, a kind of bridge between them.
So you had the stalwarts, the hardcore party loyalists who lived for patronage.
And then the more reform-minded guys, who later became known as the half-breeds. Garfield could talk to both. He found a way to act as a go-between.
So he becomes the party's indispensable negotiator.
Exactly. Goodyear's argument is that Garfield used his intellectual depth, his mastery of policy, to sound principled, while also navigating the absolute chaos of Gilded Age deal-making. He was the honest broker everyone turned to.
That reputation for bringing people together is really what set the stage well, for everything that came next.
It made the impossible possible.
And on that note, at Mindful Moments, our YouTube channel, you can explore more AI book analysis, summaries, and critiques that encourage reflection and rational thought. It's also, I think, really valuable for aspiring authors looking to understand how great stories are built.
So that reputation for compromise leads him to the 1880 Republican Convention. And the book paints this incredibly dramatic scene. The party is just completely deadlocked.
Right, you have the factions for Ulysses S. Grant trying for a third term, and then the supporters of James G. Blaine and John Sherman, and they just will not budge.
And Garfield's just there as a floor leader for Sherman. He's not even a candidate, but he gives these amazing speeches, and everyone already knows he's the one guy who can talk to all sides.
And after ballot, after ballot, after ballot, they finally turn to him.
36 ballots. And out of nowhere, James Garfield is the compromise nominee. It's an incredible moment.
The campaign that followed was, well, a classic of the era. He ran what they called a front porch campaign from his home in Ohio.
Right, which was a pretty common thing back then. The candidate stays put, and the delegations of supporters are brought to him. It let them control the message and avoid the chaos of travel.
So he wins, he gets to the White House, and that unifier persona is tested on day one.
Immediately. Phase 3 of the book is all about the war over patronage appointments, which leads to this huge showdown with the ultimate political boss, Roscoe Conkling of New York.
Conkling was the leader of the stalwarts, and he basically believed he owned every federal job in his state.
And he demanded control. But Garfield, to his credit, just flatly refused. He insisted on asserting presidential authority. It wasn't just a fight over jobs. It was a fundamental fight over who was in charge, the president or the party bosses.
The political stakes were just enormous. It got so bad that Conkling and his ally, Thomas Platt, actually resigned from the U.S. Senate in protest.
It was a massive political gamble. Conkling expected the New York legislature to immediately re-elect him and humiliate the president.
And this whole episode just highlights Garfield's determination. He wanted to push for at least some civil service reform and show the presidency was independent, even if it meant blowing up his own party.
To try and keep things together, though, the book notes he made a really smart move, appointing his rival, James G. Blaine, as Secretary of State.
A classic keep your enemies closer move. Bring the other big faction leader inside the tent.
Exactly. It was a brief moment of real presidential authority before the tragedy.
Yeah.
The book's narrative shifts here, mentioning his shooting by a disgruntled office seeker at a train station.
And we'll leave the details of what happened next for the book itself, but that event instantly turns the story from a political drama into a national crisis.
Right. So let's pull back. When you look at the whole portrait Goodyear paints, who was James A. Garfield?
Well, he's shown as just brilliant, genuinely gifted intellectually with boundless energy, but also constantly overworked. He was juggling being a scholar, a soldier, a lawyer, a politician, and the family man.
And Goodyear really highlights his ability to listen to the other side. That was real. It's what made him a potential unifier. But this is important. The book doesn't make him a saint.
No, it shows him playing the patronage game when he had to. His reformism was imperfect. It was pragmatic. He was trying to clean up a system he was also a part of.
And you can't understand him without the supporting cast. His wife, Lucretia Crete, is portrayed as this quiet, serious, intellectual partner, a really strong, understated influence.
And then the rivals who defined his world. The proud, powerful Roscoe Conkling, who lived and breathed the spoils system.
And the ambitious James G. Blaine, who was a complicated but vital ally. And of course his mother, Eliza, whose drive really seems to be the foundation for his whole life.
The book also does a great job of giving you the texture of the era. You really feel the importance of his Ohio homestead, the colleges he attended, the chaos of the conventions, that whole front porch campaign culture.
It all comes together around three big themes. The first is that tension between division and reconciliation. That's the radical to unifier journey.
The second is that classic American story of social mobility, the power of education to lift someone from a log cabin to the presidency. It's an amazing story.
And the third, which feels very relevant today, is the fragility of reform. The book is a powerful reminder of how hard it is to clean up politics when you're up against an entrenched, powerful system.
So, what does this all mean for you listening? I think you should consider the tension the book explores, that constant struggle between sticking to your principles and making the compromises you need to make to actually govern. In a deeply fractured political landscape like ours, how often does the unifier risk being seen as a traitor by the radical they used to be?
That is the essential question of political leadership, isn't it? In any era.
Click the link on screen for the in-depth book critique. Subscribe, share, purchase via link, and think rationally.
See the many genre-based book podcasts at Mindful Moments. Subscribe and nourish your mind on the go.